So we talked about hubs in our previous lecture, and now let's talk about switches and why they're so much better than a hub. So first thing we need to look at is we look at the image here. This is a switch. The previous lecture had an image of a hub, and my question to you is, can you tell the difference? Do they look any different? Well, for the most part, no. They look almost exactly the same, and so that's why we need to know the difference between a switch and a hub, and we need to be able to identify if it's a switch or a hub. So you're going to have to look on the actual switch itself and look at the model number and pull it up to determine if it's a switch or a hub, because if you don't, you can accidentally use a hub, and we don't want to do that. So let's talk about the differences. Well, the big resounding difference is that a switch is what we call an intelligent network device. So remember in our previous lecture, I said that hubs are nothing more than dumb network device, and they're multi-port repeaters. So any data that comes in on any single port goes out all the other ports. However, a switch doesn't do that. A switch memorizes MAC addresses. And I'm going to highlight this. So for each single device on the network, remember that network interface card has a MAC address built in. And remember that I said before in the course that we use MAC addresses for communication within our local network. Well, that's where switches come into play, because switches use MAC addresses to communicate. They don't use IP addresses, they use the MAC address. And let me go ahead and write this in so this makes sense. So I'm just going to type in MAC address, and let me get this into a better color. So I'm going to just type in MAC. So when we're talking about switches, we use our MAC address to communicate. However, when we're talking about routers, we use our IP address, and we'll get into that later in the course. So getting back to this, these switches are going to memorize the MAC address of each device, and what they do is that they put that into the MAC address table. So if you just think about a simple Excel spreadsheet with two different columns, one for the computer number or the port number on the switch, and another one for the MAC address, well, it's simply just going to fill in that table, and it's going to have a table of MAC address information that's assigned to each port on the switch. And really, that's how it works. And so we have our MAC address table, and what it does is that it pays attention to both the source and the destination MAC addresses of any communication on it that's going on in the network. And I'll do a quick example once I get done with this. Now, the really great thing about this is, since it doesn't flood all the ports because it knows the MAC addresses, it only sends data to the assigned port. And so it breaks up these collision domains that we talked about that happen with hubs, where data, because it's going everywhere, we have potential collisions going on all over the place because our traffic is congested all across our network. However, with switches, data only goes to where it's supposed to go, and we don't flood all the ports. So it's much more efficient, and it breaks up these collision domains, and it's also much more secure. So let's do a quick example. So let's say we have computer 1, computer 2, computer 3, and computer 4. So let's say we just turned on our switch. It's brand new out of the box. It doesn't know anything. And let's say computer 1 wants to send a file to computer 2. Well, what happens? Well, the very first time that it boots up, this doesn't know. So it sends a request. It says, hey, it sends a request to all the computers on the network, and it says, hey, are you this computer? Are you this destination with this MAC address? And then this computer is going to respond, and then it's going to record it into its MAC address table. And as they all communicate, it's going to do that process, and only the computer that is the proper destination address is going to respond and says, yeah, that's me here. I'm on this port. And so over time, and literally in a matter of seconds, it's going to fill in this MAC address table. And so within maybe a minute of it booting up, or even less, that's how quick this happens, it's going to have this MAC address table populated. And so as you start communicating out on the network, and for example, if you want to send some data from computer 1 to computer 2, it's not going to flood all the ports. So it's going to go into that port, and it's going to come out of this one, and it's only going to go to number 2. So we're not going to be flooding everything else and causing all these collision domains. So that's the great thing about a switch. And I'm going to revisit this, and I'm going to talk about this process in detail as well, about how it works. But I really wanted to introduce this to you and let you know how a switch works and why it's so much better than using a hub, and really understand why it's our standard. It really is our standard in our network infrastructure today. Everybody uses switches because of how they work. So if you have any questions about this, let me know. But before you ask questions about switches, just continue to watch the next couple of lectures, because I'm going to talk about how this works in detail in a couple of lectures. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next lecture.